Welcome to the chosen ones. God did not choose the strongest. He picked the most surrendered because only the broken can hold the blueprint for what has never been constructed before. Allow to marinate for a second. You see, there is a reason your life hasn't made sense to the typical person. And it's because your life was never supposed to be ordinary. While most people were busy creating resumes, you were transforming into a weapon forged in fire, baptized in treachery, and taught in the art of divine resilience. Fact psychologists have discovered that persons who experience tremendous trauma without enough emotional assistance often disintegrate or awaken into something impenetrable. The chosen ones. You all did not suddenly awaken. You surpassed rationality. You made mending seem like a revolution. And let's be honest for a second. Your life has seemed like a movie that skipped the beginning, threw you into turmoil, and said, "Good luck, divine soldier." No screenplay, no directions, only plot twists, phony buddies, spiritual assaults, and you still walked out dazzling like you stole light from heaven's vault. It wasn't simply survival. This was a wonderful plan. Because the assignment is over your life, it was designed to smash the counterfeit and uncover the everlasting and baby. You didn't just carry it. You made it appear like artwork. So brace in, because this video isn't about surface-level affirmations or rehashed platitudes. We're going to explain why your presence is proof of the supernatural, why your foes remain quiet, horrified by your return, and why the call on your life would have killed anybody else. And to those who believed you were simply being extra, oh, honey, they had no clue you were carrying a heavenly pact inked with spiritual fire. Let's get to it. For starters, you were given something that would have shattered most souls since you were born revived. You didn't just survive the fire. You were born from it. That's what people are missing. They believe that your experiences made you stronger. But the fact is that the power was already inside you. The pandemonium only showed it. Most individuals would have collapsed beneath the spiritual weight you carried. They would have asked for an escape, a shortcut, or even a method to relieve the suffering. But not you. You remained in it. You went through circumstances in which the light at the end of the tunnel did not yet exist. And you kept going. That is not survival. That is miraculous endurance. Your existence was designed for things that make no sense to the rest of the world, whilst others crumble under scrutiny. You handled the pressure as if it were part of your plan. And it was because your spirit did not just come here to experience life. It comes to rebuild the spiritual code around you. That kind of endeavor does not come with easy, acclaim, or comfort. It includes spiritual ambushes and betrayals masquerading as friendships. Family members that see your brightness as a danger in a society that continuously tells you you're too much. Even though you were emotionally wounded, you did not collapse. You did not self-destruct. You sat with the suffering, listened to it, learned its language, and then channeled it to create something precious inside you. You've accomplished the impossible without recognizing it. While folks were celebrating material success, you were acquiring soul wounds while yet shielding your heart. And that's what distinguishes you. Not only did you overcome obstacles, but also maintained your integrity throughout. People look at you today and see perseverance, but they don't realize they're watching resurrection. A spirit that refused to die despite the fact that everything around it allowed it to. The reality is, you did not rise from the ashes. There were no ashes to begin with since you were never completely burnt. You were tempered, honed, and sharpened. And now that you're walking in your light, people are shocked, not because you made it, but because you weren't meant to. The odds weren't just stacked against you. They were intended to bury you. But here you are, living evidence that certain spirits are predestined for the impossible. Number 2, the task was not about success. It was about maintaining sanity in the face of psychological assault. People often believe that the most difficult portion of your trip was the struggle, loss, or even betrayal. No, the true challenge was keeping your mind intact while carrying an assignment that was continuously attempting to shatter it. What you experienced wasn't simply trauma. It was psychological war. You were targeted with assaults that were not always audible or apparent. Sometimes it was the gradual, quiet unraveling of your peace, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the emotional games that made you doubt your own reality. These were the genuine weaponry. And you did more than simply survive. You remained grounded. You maintained your sense of self despite navigating emotional minefields. People will never know how difficult it was to smile while your soul screamed. They will not realize how exhausting it is to carry knowledge that others scorn. You couldn't even express how you felt because every time you did, someone dismissed it or threw it back at you. You learned early on that telling the truth typically resulted in punishment. Instead, you learned to plan 10 steps ahead. You watched, evaluated, and defended your artwork in quiet. That wasn't a weakness. That was a method for surviving. Your strength is more than simply what you conquered. It's how you remained. Clear, calm, and aware in surroundings that are meant to confound you. Most individuals would have succumbed to that type of emotional manipulation. They would have snapped, become resentful, or lost their sense of reality. But you didn't. You stood steadfast. You questioned everything, not out of paranoia, but rather out of insight. You were never too sensitive. You were very aware. You could see through the masks that folks weren't ready to go, and this made you a target. But this is the most powerful portion. Never allow what they did to you define who you are. You did not pass the suffering on. You did not let the lunacy to corrupt your thoughts. You completely rebuilt your component. You put your sanity back together like a mosaic. One fractured truth at a time. That is not only survival. That is heavenly mastery. That's why no one can replicate your shine. Because your light sprung from a conflict. Most individuals would not have come away with their minds intact. Number 3, you were tasked with putting a stop to what others were unable to identify. You were transported to regions where people had been suffering silently for centuries. However, no one had the confidence to speak out about it. You were not simply born into a family or community. You were born into a cycle, and your very existence threatened to disrupt that pattern. You were aware early on that something was wrong. Things that others considered normal never set well with your soul. Secrets, deception, guilt-tripping, and passive hostile conduct. Everyone else adjusted to it, but you could not. Not because you were tough, but because your spirit was averse to anything artificial. You were sent to terminate what everyone else was doing on tiptoe. You were the one who posed the difficult questions, the one who said that this isn't love, or why do we constantly act as if nothing is wrong? They described you as rebellious, theatrical, or even ungrateful. But deep down, they knew you were revealing something they had hidden, and they weren't prepared for the light you shed. You did not just question conduct. You caused system disruptions. You breached the unspoken rules, the generational agreements that kept everyone in agony but too afraid to admit it. What they don't tell you about being selected is that it often entails being targeted not because you are wrong, but because you are correct. It's too early. Your clarity was seen as a threat. People were put off by your reluctance to accept dysfunction. They were not upset with you. They were enraged because your presence forced them to confront aspects of themselves they spent years attempting to conceal. That is why they have isolated you. This is why they ridiculed your truth. Because your calling revealed more than just their shadows. It made them uncomfortable, but you did not stop. Even when you were misunderstood, mistreated, and pushed away, you continued to work. You chose the truth above peace. You spoke out, even if your voice shook. The cycle now stops with you, not because it was simple, but because you were ready to be the one who spoke out while everyone else remained silent. You didn't just endure dysfunction. You tackled it. You didn't just notice the gloom. You became the light that could not be ignored. Number 4, you accomplished something that the wealthy would never dare to do. You healed in public and bled in private. You were not attempting to impress anybody. You were only trying to live with your essence intact, while others hid behind filters, performances, and perfectly timed grins. You were breaking down in real time, but still showing up. Not because you want attention, but because concealing was not an option. Your makeover was not aesthetic. It was an interior reconstruction. And the reality is, many people couldn't stand what they saw in you. Not because it was ugly, but because it was authentic. You didn't get to wait until you had everything prepared before stepping out into the world. You had to move while mourning, lead while grieving, and heal while being seen, criticized, and misinterpreted. They called it drama. They termed it frailty. But deep down, they saw bravery. They lacked the required vocabulary. Most individuals only display their growth after the scars have disappeared. But you allowed them to see the process, the unraveling, and the holy turmoil of becoming something you had never been shown. They mocked your breakdowns because they'd never had to break. They ridiculed your fragility because they had never had to rebuild from ground zero. They watched you breaking apart and concluded you were failing, unaware that you were building the groundwork for something impenetrable. While they were preserving an image, you were safeguarding your reality. That's why you're so strong today. Because every aspect of you was earned, not created. You made it through without being chilled. You didn't let the sorrow change you. You did not shrink to be palatable. You did not conceal your growth in order to make others comfortable. And it is the actual miracle. You prioritized sincerity above acceptability. You bled silently, healed aloud, and yet walked gracefully. That cannot be faked or replicated. And that is why they are now studying your movements. Because what they previously considered a disaster turned out to be the template for true freedom. Number 5, the spiritual aspect of your existence was set to new area. Nothing about your voyage has followed the typical map. And this is because you were not supposed to follow anybody else's route. From the beginning, life kept sending you into uncharted terrain, as if the world intended you to build roads rather than walk them. You did not have mentors. You didn't have someone to hold your hand throughout the storm. In reality, the most of the time, the personnel who were meant to advise you were either sleeping or deliberately attempting to impede you. So, rather than inheriting direction, you had to create your own compass. That's why your life never fit neatly into categories, whilst others checked boxes and climbed ladders. You were being deprived of everything that gave you a false feeling of self. You didn't just learn from experience. You were initiated via pain, isolation, and otherworldly downloads. Your teachings did not come from textbooks. They got through betrayal, through stillness, being so misunderstood that you had to turn to the supernatural to make sense of everything. Here's where things get crazy. People saw you move with grace and attempted to replicate your shine. They assumed your strength was a calculation. They didn't know your movements were being directed in real time by something much beyond human comprehension. That's why people keep attempting to copy you, but failing terribly. Because what they are attempting to reproduce was never taught. It was a spiritual epiphany, and is not for sale, not for show, and certainly not transportable. You were not just stepping into new levels. You were creating them from scratch. Every time you were knocked down, you emerged with a fresh layer of insight that no one could teach or take. You were the blueprint. Not because you had all the answers, but because you learned to navigate by relying on a higher frequency that only you could detect. And that kind of navigation cannot be described. It can only be embodied. So people keep asking, how did you do it? They'll never realize that the map was never outside of you. You were the map, road, code, and miracle. Number 6, you were placed in isolation because heaven could not risk your task being polluted. You were not left out. You were set aside. There is a major difference. But no one noticed that at the time. When the calls stopped, the invites dried up, and the very people you invested in suddenly turned cold. It seemed to be rejection. However, it was really a kind of protection. Heaven wasn't being cruel. It was being surgical, because what you were carrying was too precious to be impacted by unclean hands, petty thoughts, or half-formed souls. You lost more than simply persons. You also lost illusions. The treachery did not simply sting. It disclosed. It revealed who was simply there for convenience, not the covenant. Even though the quiet was deafening, it provided something much more significant than applause. Clarity. You were never supposed to blossom in a crowded space. Your soul craved calm, isolation, and quiet. Not because you were defective, but because you were being constructed in a manner that most people would not comprehend. You were not expelled for being worthless. You were banished because your mission was too precious to be exposed to spiritual defilement. There were talks you were never supposed to be a part of, energies you were never meant to accept, mindsets that would have harmed your calling before it was fully operational. So heaven drew you back, concealed you in plain sight, and allowed you to grow in the shadows like a seed, a hidden weapon. You now walk with a presence that concerns others who previously rejected you. Not because you're loud, but because you are genuine. You don't need their approval. You don't run in circles. You do not beg for room. And that amount of self-absorption offends them greatly. Why? Because they believed you needed them to be great. And now they are seeing you shine without them. That seclusion did not break you. It refined you. It compelled you to learn how to hear God without external hindrance. It pushed you to integrate your own energies. That's why you're untouchable today. Because your rise was not due to exposure. It sprang from divine concealment. The sort that guards precious objects till the appropriate moment. And your time has come. Number 7. Your achievement is a kind of retribution against generational programming. Your achievement is not just personal. It is spiritual warfare. It is an act of defiance against all your lineage has secretly committed to. They swallowed the anguish. They normalized the stillness that they dubbed strength. You did not just select healing. You battled tooth and nail against decades of emotional repression, fear-based ideas, and ingrained survival strategies. You were born under contracts you never signed, yet you had the fortitude to shred them up while others fulfilled the roles they were assigned. Stay silent, little, and broken. You said no. You were not interested in following the script. You did not wish to live in dysfunction. You want freedom. That meant confronting what everyone else avoided. The generational curses are shrouded in religion, pride, secrecy, and denial. And recovering from it was not easy. It was wartime, not a loud battle, but a profound interior conflict. The sort that makes your body hurt and your soul cry because you're breaking family habits that have been passed down for generations. Every time you chose therapy over gossip, every time you respected your boundaries, instead of betraying yourself for peace, every time you chose honesty over image, quiet, turmoil, authenticity, or overperformance, you were shattering an old enchantment. Make one choice at a time. That is not only healing. That is spiritual assault against a system that relied on your family's quiet. And now your mere presence threatens those who have never questioned anything. Because you are the question that your life poses. The excuses. Your tranquility reveals the turmoil, and your freedom makes their restraints unpleasant. You did not come to blend in. You came to disrupt, to clear up the mess others had made. And the irony? You were probably the most disregarded, doubted, or misunderstood. But you are the one with the ability to reverse everything. So, sure, your triumph is loud, as it should be, since it is the result of every chain you broke. It's the sound of a cycle ending. Your glow represents generational vengeance. Your wins are coated with ancient justice, and your existence demonstrates that healing is more than just a possibility. It is revolutionary. Number 8. You were never too much. They were just unprepared for the undiluted holiness. They claimed you were too passionate, emotional, and profound. But you were just too genuine for others who continued to hide behind masks. Your energy did not meet their expectations since it was not intended to. You were not born to blend in. You were born to wake people awake. And that type of presence will always frighten individuals who have formed their identities on sleepwalking through life. Your sensitivity was not a weakness. It was a radar. You sensed things that others couldn't identify. You caught up on falsehoods before they were told. You detect tension in rooms when everyone else is faking. That is not being extra. That is spiritual intelligence. However, instead of being acknowledged for your skill, you were often made to feel like you were the issue. Because people couldn't control what they didn't understand. They certainly couldn't handle someone who saw beneath their surface. You were not the source of their discomfort. It was something you activated in them. Your presence triggered previously suppressed truths. Your candor compelled people to confront their own denial. Your light didn't simply shine. It exposed. When individuals are not ready to face themselves, they will shun the mirror. That is why they said you were too much. It was simpler to blame you than to confront the part of themselves they had spent years avoiding. You were never too sensitive. You just refused to remain numb. You were never too intense. You just refused to compromise your need to make others feel protected. You were never a villain. You were the vessel. And those who couldn't take your energy weren't awful people. They were simply not ready. Your presence demanded honesty in a society founded on deception. It required alignment in a culture where masks are revered. And now that you've stopped apologizing for your abundance, you're becoming unstoppable. You suddenly realize that what they rejected was your precious design. You were not too much. You were precisely what the room needed, but not what it desired. And that distinction is where your power resides. Because you did not come to be palatable. You came to be a prophet. Prophets never fit in. They stick out and shook the earth. Number 9. The assignment over your life was not a calling. You signed a contract in the spirit before the birth. You never just discovered your destiny one day. It was ingrained in you from the beginning. As a youngster, you had a calm, knowing understanding of what was going on. Others overlooked the underlying drive that would never allow you to settle for mediocre. None of this was arbitrary. Your life did not unfold by happenstance. It was a predetermined assignment, a spiritual pact. Your spirit said yes long before your body arrived on earth. That's why your struggles began early. The opposition was not an accident. It was premeditated. Darkness always perceives heavenly duties before they manifest. You didn't have to say who you are. The opponent sensed it before you did. This is why you were assaulted when you were still delicate, forming, and innocent. Because if the adversary could distort you before you recalled your ability, he might derail the whole mission you were on. Not stop it, just postpone it. Nonetheless, he failed. You've always needed to fight harder. You weren't compelled. You were selected. You were not permitted to blend in. You were not permitted to sleepwalk through life like others. You were asked to disrupt patterns, tamper with darkness, and transport frequencies that could not be duplicated. That type of task does not come easily. It comes with fire. It comes with spiritual combat, which you didn't understand until much later. And now that you're fully awake and unapologetic, you're starting to realize why your life seemed so heavy at times, why others turned on you for no reason, and why you were often the black sheep, the scapegoat, or the one who always felt different. It's because your spirit agreed to accomplish something that others would never contemplate. And that much weight cannot be placed on an ordinary person. It had to be you. So, no, this is not only a calling. This is a covenant. You didn't stumble across it. You stepped in with authority, even if you needed to crawl at first. And now, the same forces who attempted to mislead you are watching in quiet as you ascend in clarity, supported by heaven, carrying out what you vowed to long before this earth ever knew your name. Number 10. You were born with eyes that could see systems rather than simply individuals, which made you a danger even before you spoke. You never simply read someone. You read systems. You may go into a room and feel the unstated dynamics. You didn't just observe what someone said. You sensed the intensity behind it. Your soul detected what others did not see from a young age. The tension in close-knit families, the ego behind faux humility, and the dread of concealing and controlling conduct while others respond to surface-level gestures. You were deciphering fundamental realities. That type of perception makes people uneasy, not because you were incorrect, but because you were correct. Too soon. You didn't need evidence to suspect anything was amiss. You didn't need a whole tale to realize that someone was moving from wounds rather than knowledge. And this is what made you hazardous to the systems. People had formed their safety around the idea that you regarded them not as individuals, but as bearers of generational programming, routines, attitudes, and behaviors that were unquestionably inherited. You did not fall for the charm. You saw the control hidden beneath it. You were unaffected by loud authority because you saw the uncertainty behind it. When they discovered they couldn't control you, they stopped trying. They attempted to discredit you. They labeled you paranoid, too analytical, or difficult to work with. But it was never about you. That was about their uneasiness at being viewed without permission. Gaslighting was their go-to weapon, not to reprimand you, but to confuse you so you questioned the gift. They couldn't explain. They needed you to shrink so that their illusions could continue. Because when someone goes in with the truth in their soul, it undermines every falsehood that others rely on. You were never too much. You were just too explicit. You weren't created to be deceived. You were created to expose and uplift. Your judgment is your weapon, compass, and shield. And now, the exact thing they sought to humiliate you for is the reason you walk with such confidence. Because once you've seen the system behind the mask, you can never go back. And this is when genuine power emerges. A number. Your life has been a living condemnation of everyone who accepted less than their souls. Truth? You never had to say anything to make folks uncomfortable. Just your presence, your tranquility, your unwillingness to comply. It stated everything. You did not enter rooms asking to be welcomed. You arrived already aware of who you were. And this alone caused some to move in their chairs. It wasn't because you believed you were superior. You refused to pretend. In a society where most people want acceptance, sincerity seems like a danger. You made no judgments about individuals. You just lived freely. However, freedom is harmful for the shackled mentality. When someone spends their whole life persuading themselves to settle for a profession, a relationship, a belief system, or a version of themselves that does not reflect their unvarnished truth, it might seem like an indictment. Not because you accused them, but because your actions showed their compromise. You've undoubtedly observed how folks who never offered you genuine support become upset by your progress. They couldn't take your radiance. Not because it was offensive, but because it emphasized everything. They decided to humiliate themselves. You reminded them of their aspirations. They buried the truth. They abandoned the portions of themselves they had dulled in order to live. Instead of facing it, they pushed their uneasiness onto you. You were not the villain. You were the mirror. Most individuals aren't prepared to face themselves in the eye. You chose various options. You say no to easy roads. When it came to choose between comfort and development, you chose growth. And when you recovered, some people became bitter because your very presence elevated them. And not everyone wants to be labeled higher. Some people get hooked to the personas they've perfected. So, when they derided your travels, they were not ridiculing you. They were insulting the part of themselves that realized they could have done more, but didn't. Your life proved that excuses were unnecessary, that progress was possible, that freedom existed, and that truth hurts when you've based your identity on avoidance. You did not dull your light. Rather, you allowed it to blaze. In doing so, you unveiled every shade that individuals believed they had effectively covered. That's why your adventure shocked them. It was not your success. You refused to settle. A number. You accomplished something others couldn't even imagine. You overcame the need for approval. Something snapped throughout your voyage. In the finest manner possible. You stopped asking to be understood. You stopped twisting yourself into a version that would make others comfortable. You stopped looking for acclaim or acceptance from people you didn't know. That transition was not loud, yet it was revolutionary because when you reclaimed yourself, you entered a realm of power that most people cannot comprehend: spiritual sovereignty. You weren't looking to be loved anymore. You were attempting to be genuine. You quit acting in venues that were never intended for your reality. And the silent determination to just remove the mechanisms that had exploited you for years. Insecurity provides fertile ground for manipulation. It flourishes when you still believe that you owe someone your quiet, obedience, or identity. However, once you cease need their approval, the whole framework collapses. That is what occurred. You become whole in your own vitality. You choose alignment over approval. You chose the truth above the tribe. And that level of autonomy makes others uncomfortable, particularly those who rely on your continuous need for them. When you broke free, you did not just walk away from dysfunction. You've disclosed it. Your independence revealed how much influence they had over you and how little authority they now wielded. You began producing without waiting for applause. You began speaking without waiting for responses. You began living without emotional debt. And suddenly, the connections you had formed on playing tiny couldn't last. You didn't destroy bridges, you just stopped carrying them. They labeled it selfish. They labeled it arrogant. But what people were actually responding to was your clarity. You ceased being programmable. You became free. You began living as if your soul responded only to God. And it does. That is the ultimate level of freedom. Not the sort that shouts and rebels, but the kind that is calm, grounded, and absolutely uncontrolled. You did not merely liberate yourself. You violated the unstated rule that said you had to wait to be permitted. And now that you understand you never needed permission, you're unstoppable. A number. Your humility was not a weakness. It was control over the ego while wielding cosmic power. They assumed you were soft since you did not flex. They assumed you were uncertain because you did not hurry to prove it. They misread your calm for bewilderment and your stillness for acquiescence. However, they could not have been more incorrect. What they were seeing was not weakness. It was self-mastery. You had access to immense power, the sort that does not have to be loud, the sort that is harmful due to its discipline. You didn't attempt to be the center of attention because you understood who you were. You did not leap into every fight, limelight, or chance to demonstrate them. Not because you were afraid, but because you were strategic. Real power does not elicit emotional responses. It moves precisely. And your humility was not about underestimating yourself. It was about securing your assignment. You understood what you were carrying, and you weren't going to squander it showing your value to those who were determined to misunderstand you while others performed. You were watching them talk only to be heard. You were deciphering their spiritual architecture. You've observed what makes people tick, what they feared, what they pretended. You examined motivations, not just words. You were acting like a prophet in a room full of actors, and they couldn't see you coming because their vanity had blinded them to your intelligence. You were never passive. You were patient, and patience is a language reserved for the spiritually mature. Understand, you were not concealing. You were fortifying. You were learning how to harness cosmic power without allowing it to fuel your ego. Because you understood that the instant the ego entered, clarity left. And your purpose was too important to be twisted by hubris. That is what they did not get. You weren't attempting to get attention. You came here to win fights. Spiritual, ancestral, and internal ones. And this necessitated a new type of strength. One that does not brag. One that listens more than it talks. One that bends but never breaks. Those who formerly thought you were soft are understanding now that your quiet has blossomed into strategy and your humility has transformed into indisputable leadership. You were simply a sovereign. Real sovereignty never yells. It just rules. A number. You did not just accomplish the impossible. You accomplished it while being seen, evaluated, undermined, and betrayed. You were not afforded the luxury of quiet, assistance, or shelter. Nonetheless, you accomplished the impossible, and you did it without being shielded or applauded. You accomplished it in full view while being ripped apart, lied about, ridiculed, mocked, and set up to fail. You arose while under watch. You built under pressure and healed while still wounded. That isn't just perseverance. It's miraculous execution under fire. The reality is, they never expected you to succeed. Not because you weren't competent, but because you seemed normal. You didn't flaunt your abilities. You did not promote your excellence. You were not showy. They believed you were vulnerable, but they couldn't see what frequency you were vibrating at. You didn't need volume. You had alignment, and the alignment was not for show. It was your gasoline. This is why you kept moving. When others could have stopped, you were linked to something deeper. A prophecy was penned long before you arrived. They were watching, expecting to find you sliding. They spread rumors in the hopes of distracting you. They withheld assistance in the hopes of draining your energies. They imitated you, expecting to outperform you at being you. But none of it worked because you were not motivated by ego. You were carried by fate. You were not struggling for visibility. You walked in obedience. You weren't aiming to be noticed. You have been sent. And now they're compelled to confess what they attempted to deny. You really did it. That what they considered illusion was really insight. They called it luck, but it was really labor. That the model they once mocked is now the one they're silently and frantically attempting to mimic because they still don't comprehend how you survived all of that and emerged radiant, focused, and favored. But you understand that you weren't simply dealing with ability. You were operating with a spiritual contract, a heavenly mandate that no amount of derision or manipulation could stop. That is why you were not crushed. Even if you were targeted, you did not just withstand the sabotage. You evolved into it. And now your climb is a discovery. Not only is the impossible attainable, but you are also the fulfillment of the prophesy. You were not only picked, You have been commissioned. Every scar you have, every room you entered where you did not belong. You absorbed every betrayal while being kind. It was never random. It was a refinement. Heaven never required you to blend in. Heaven needs you to burst through. That's why your tale is unique. It was not meant to. You're not a copy. You're the code. The living embodiment of what occurs when God chooses to disrupt the mundane. Your mission in life was never about comfort. It was about the consequences. You come to challenge deeply ingrained beliefs and routines. Rise openly while being crucified quietly. Most individuals can never comprehend the spiritual weight of such magnitude. And still, you carried it. You're still here. They sought to characterize you based on your silence. But it was in solitude that you gained power. They attempted to devalue you, but your worth was never debatable. You were challenged like few others in plain sight. And yet, you ascended with integrity, clarity, and strength. They could not copy, steal, or suppress. Your basic existence is now disrupted, not because you sought to be, but because your alignment reveals what others have avoided. Your bravery to progress while being observed has destroyed illusions and sparked awakenings. You did not just complete an assignment. You became the task. You didn't just survive the fire. You went away with keys. So let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them take notes. Because what you are carrying is not meant for acclaim. It is for impact. You did not come to fit in. You came to change the environment. And now the prophesy is in action. Nothing. Nobody can halt what has been divinely crafted through you. This is a confirmation. You've done something few people have the courage to try and the fortitude to complete. Not for attention, not for vengeance, but for a reason. And now you step in, fully energized. If this spoke to you on a deep level, you would not scroll past it. You did not discover this message by chance. Someone else needs to hear what you just heard. Subscribe to the channels to ensure you never miss another wonderful download. Leave a comment and tell us what resonated with you the most. Your opinion matters here. Hit the like button. If you believe the power of this word, share this video with someone who is on the verge of giving up. Perhaps the message is what draws them back to their mission. You aren't simply supporting content. You are backing a movement, one based on healing and the emergence of the chosen ones. Let us keep waking the planet, a soul at a time. God bless you.